All right, so today's guest is someone who has really been kind of really living at the intersection of science, history, storytelling, and has turned all of that experience into a historical novel that we're going to be talking about today, about a woman whose knowledge just really scared powerful men. Which, if you cannot tell by being a subscriber to my podcast or my Substack, you probably already know that's my favorite kind of story and woman. So this recent arc that we're just wrapping up here on the podcast has been all about what happens to women across history when they refuse to stay in the roles that the patriarchy has assigned to them. And so this makes this fit really perfect and with what we've been talking about on the podcast lately. So let's get started, and I will have our guest introduce herself.
Something that's, kind of bitchy.
Pretty bitchy.
Bitchy? I know.
It's just, bitchy.
Well, first of all, you're a little bitchy. That's next level bitchy.
She is Dr. Gigi Berardi, who is a professor at Western Washington University and author of a forthcoming book, Bianca's Cure. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Let's see. I have been at Western Washington University in the College of the Environment for quite some time. But before that, I had positions on the East Coast in other universities and colleges. And so I certainly identify as a professor, but I've also worked virtually all my life as a journalist too. And so
Okay.
it's really important to me to be able to move between genres and styles in terms of communicating. And that academic voice doesn't work for so many people.
It
So
really doesn't.
yeah, so I've really tried to be able to move between creative nonfiction and journalistic writing and now fiction. Yeah.
That's amazing. I have really appreciate people who are very interdisciplinary in their approaches and are able to write well, which going back to my first master's, I remember my advisor telling me at once, I was complaining that I was worried that my writing wasn't academic enough. It didn't sound academic-y enough. And her response was, don't worry about it. It's because you can actually write well. Most academics can't. Bless her, bless her. She was hyping me up a lot, but it is true
Yeah.
that there are a lot of people who get so tied down into that academic style that they can't break out of it and write to like work with other people. And I have to say, I thought that I was probably one of the most interdisciplinary scholars that I knew. No, not to toot my own horn, but I kind of free float between a lot of stuff. But I was looking at your work, and I don't think I have anything on you because you've done a whole lot of stuff, and now I didn't even know you've done journalism. That's amazing. But you've crossed into science, humanities, all across the board. I tend to stay out of science mostly because math kind of gives me hives. I don't want to do that. So I think it's just really impressive how many different fields that you've covered, and now breaking into writing in writing fiction as well, which is amazing. So
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, I didn't know if that was a question. Yeah, it's all
Oh, yeah,
good. Yeah.
I just kind of just me kind of fangirling, I guess. I just really appreciate anybody who's able to communicate that well with people. I think it's a huge part of
Yeah.
writing. So you've spent a lot of your career in teaching, obviously journalism, scientific spaces. What is it about your background and things that kind of drew you to writing historical fiction?
Because I was interested in what could be this story. And in fact, I think you really nailed it when you described me as interested in science, history, and storytelling.
Mhm.
And I think that's it in a nutshell, that if you are interested in science and the history of science and can tell a good story about it, I think that's a win-win-win. And we're Phil, as you've interviewed, others as well. We're filling in the story with what has been otherwise a very thinly sketched narrative,
Yes, yeah.
and um, and so people ask me, is this a true story, or what about it is true? And I say that if I were to write a story based on the historic record, it would be about 4 pages long.
Right,
So
gotta fill in the gaps.
it always comes down to that. So I think it's really all about, filling in the spaces and writing a compelling story
Mhm.
as if you were that character, because how can you write otherwise? So you have to
Exactly.
put yourself in it. And I identified some with Bianca. It was not an easy road. I actually wrote the entire book from the standpoint of Francesco, her lover, and I
Mhm.
threw out 100,000 words.
Oh my God, that's so much
Mhm.
work. You were like, I can't write from this perspective anymore. I gotta change this.
And to this day, if I have to let go of a paragraph, I'm a maniac. I'm an absolute maniac. So 100,000 words was really significant.
Yeah, you're like, oh boy, what am I gonna do with all of this? I'm sure you got to repurpose some of it, but it's difficult if you're changing the
I
whole
know,
perspective.
yeah, surprisingly very little.
Oh wow,
So
yeah.
what I did was I had a completely different approach then, which is kind of mood driven,
Mhm.
voice driven narrative, and then took on the persona of Bianca.
Yeah, and let's talk about Bianca because I really love her. As I mentioned before we started the interview, I haven't actually finished the whole book yet, and I know we don't want to give any spoilers to the listeners anyway, so that works out perfectly. I won't accidentally spoil a major plot point or anything that way. But let's talk about Bianca, kind of what drew you to her, and what we do know about her as a historical figure.
Well, this all happened one day when I was walking with an Italian friend across this piazza in Florence. So I teach in Florence.
Hmm.
I've probably taken groups of students and lived in Italy in the summer for about 15 years now.
Hmm.
And so I thought I knew Florence very well. So I was walking with this friend. We were speaking in Italian, and she said as we were walking, look at the window behind you. And where we were in front of the Hotel Loggiato dei Serviti, which is one of Rick Steves' favorite hotels in
Hmm.
Florence. But kitty corner to it was an open window. And if you actually Google open window and Florence, you'll get a story.
Oh, okay.
And she told me that the spirit of Bianca Capello lived, this woman from the 1500s, lived there, and the window has to stay open. And if it's closed, then she screams. And in fact, her nemesis, who was her lover's brother, Ferdinando, who went on to become a Grand Duke also, is in bronze on a horse looking at her, looking at that window.
Okay.
Then I snuck into the hotel and asked people working there, is that true? Do you hear a scream? And there's a scream. So I was really taken by this idea that uh, um, that this person still had a presence, and kind of asked the question, well, who was she? As it turns out, it's not clear that it's Bianca. It could be, one of Ferdinando's lovers, whatever. But it got me started, and all I knew was that, and this is well known, that allegedly she and Francesco, who were lovers until his wife died, and then
Mhm.
they were married, um, that they were killed on the same day, and supposedly by Ferdinando, the person in the square pointing.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, there must be a story there. And in
Yeah.
fact, her remains have not been found, not really. Whereas
Mhm.
Francesco was a Grand Duke and is buried in the chapel of the princes in Florence. And in fact, his remains have been exhumed twice, trying to look for evidence of malaria, so the parasitic eggs,
Mhm.
or arsenic poison, like degeneration of
Okay,
organs,
yeah, yeah.
to see how he died. So there's that's out there. It's one of the biggest mysteries of the Renaissance.
Wow.
And then I knew the other piece of information is I knew she came from Venice. And I knew that in Palazzo Vecchio, which is one of the 5 top sites to go to in Florence, so this ducal palace, she had her own room for study. Just like Francesco has this, it's called the studiolo, it's a room of treasures. Well,
Mhm.
she had another room, which is a secret room. You have to go through secret passageways to get there. And she was interested in the occult. So that's what I knew. And in fact, that must have been one of the things that attracted Francesco to her and vice versa, because the Medici were occultists at that time, his father and Francesco himself. And in fact, even a century before, in the 1400s, with the real birth of the Renaissance, great masters there, Botticelli and others, then through to the scientists in the 1500s, were occultists. They were alchemists. They were interested in what was hidden that you couldn't see and how one accesses that.
I think it's always such a fascinating period for that, and it's something I talk
Mhm.
about a bit on the podcast when I talk about the witch trials, which people often
Yes.
associate witch trials with the Middle Ages, but that's not when they were ongoing. They were really towards the beginning parts of the Renaissance, because people began to kind of poke into these areas that had previously been we don't talk about that. It's hidden. It's not discussed. But the more science comes into the fore, the more they say we have to poke at all these things that traditionally have been not looked at. That they've been forbidden to us, and we have to do that research. And I think that's is something so fascinating about that, because we think of the Renaissance as this time of like science, but it is a time where the occult is part of science because it's not understood, and they're trying to understand it all. So I think that's really fascinating.
It
Yeah.
was, but just like you're saying, you know, supposedly beginning in the 1200s or 1300s, so obviously before then, but men were involved in basically what was to become the scientific method. But if that's still the 1200s and 1300s, and now we're talking about the
Mhm.
1400s, 1500s, you can see that it was a long road to travel down
Yes.
or through for what would be science.
Mhm.
And one of my themes is that, and this is not just my theme, but I try and trace the origins of it, is that science has been so male dominated.
Mhm.
And so at that time, and what was going to happen was there was going to be this tension between chemistry and alchemy, so which have
Mhm.
the same root, and chemistry comes from alchemy in a sense. And so I really wanted Bianca to be this crazy badass alchemist, and to a certain extent she was, and she came from, in my book, a family of women herbalists.
Okay, yeah.
But instead but that is the space that men were inhabiting. So
Mhm.
I had to give her another cause, which was to try and put a little um, systematic investigation into her pursuit of this cure, and
Right.
try and test what she was doing and see what was working and what was not. So that idea of testing, which is like, biblical actually,
Really,
but
yeah.
appropriated by and became a cornerstone of the scientific method. I have her kind of being a champion for that. And then
Mhm.
from there, what's happened now is women scientists are taking the book and seeing that this road that women scientists travel is the same as 5 centuries ago. It's
It is,
still
yeah.
it's still very difficult. So
Yeah,
that's
women.
that's the person she became. And after I had written quite a bit of this, I came across a very academic book called Daughters of Alchemy.
Mhm.
I should check that. But Daughters of Alchemy, and in fact, there was a huge tradition of women alchemists in Venice in particular. And in
Wow.
fact, In fact, they're one family, Cortese, is very prominent, and that is actually the name that that I gave her coming from. We don't know that, but in Venice, and actually Cortese is a anagram for secret in Italian, segreto.
Oh, okay, okay.
That was
That's
just like a little cosmic, whoa, how
like,
did things coming together that weren't planned? Yeah.
it is always interesting when that happens. You're working on something and then you find other research and you just go, oh, okay. I jumped to a conclusion, but somebody else had already, like, this is already there. I just, like, my
Right,
brain automatically connected it without even seeing this other research. It's always
right,
fascinating. So
right.
how much of, obviously it's historical fiction, right? But how much is history, how much is fiction kind of with the book?
So, so clearly, um, sorry, I'm just looking up that
No, you're
title.
fine.
Yeah, Daughters of Alchemy.
Mhm.
So, clearly I had to fill in. There it is. Daughters of Alchemy, Women and Scientific Culture in Early Modern Italy. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I will put a link to that in the
Yeah.
I will put
Yeah.
a link to that definitely.
So, um, the beats in terms of years and seasons, even
Mhm.
in which the plot is laid out, is accurate. So what happened is I wrote this with besides original sources, like I have some of the letters that Bianca wrote, Bianca the Grand Duchess, um, just as an example. Besides that, I had a really good colleague in Italy, and who's an art historian. And then I had another colleague, Stefano Corazzini, who's a docent at Palazzo Vecchio, and he had written a book called A Duke in Love. So he basically wrote the nonfiction version of my book, a creative
Okay.
nonfiction. And I came across it maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So I had actually written the book, but I really used that as a touchstone
Mhm.
because his research was pretty detailed. So in terms of when she gets married and who her parents were, and um, when she had a child or when she had another child,
Mhm.
that is all accurate. Um, the casino, the laboratory
Mhm.
where Francesco's magic happens, that is accurate. That is
Okay.
real. The fact that there is a wooded area next to that casino, that is real. And in fact, I mentioned Michelangelo in the book and also Galileo, but Michelangelo was a very young teenager then when Lorenzo de' Medici in the 1400s plucked him from that particular garden.
Mhm.
So, what happened to that garden afterwards, we don't know, but I have spun a story from that.
That's
So,
amazing.
I would say everything is accurate except where, in terms of a historical record,
Mhm.
except where, shocker, this woman's historical record is a little scanty. But the points in between that I was filling
Right.
with um, our historical record.
Right. It's like you're filling in like the internal thoughts and the, the struggles and things that she's going through, but it's following the exact timeline of her life, which I think that's really great. And I love that you're including these little historical figures who aren't famous yet. That are just these smaller figures at the time. Because I love that. I have a friend who also writes historical fiction, and the stuff he writes is set during the American Revolution, and you'll see these little bits. So it's like a person who isn't yet who you know of in the history books, and this is what they're like, at this moment in time, which is always, I think it's fascinating to do that with these little characters and be able to to throw that around, make fun of them, kind of poke fun at their past, or just bring up who they were as a youngster, which is, it's just great. I love that.
Yeah, and I would just say that right now I'm working on an Italian translation,
Mhm.
and so I have an editor, and we're working together on this. So I'm kind of editing his editing, and we are going back and forth a little bit because he will write, "Oh, Michelangelo was dead. He was 89 years old." And and I'll say, "No, he actually hadn't died. It was 2 months before his death. And the Medici were
Exactly.
trying to get him back into Florence. And you know damn well that's the case." So anyway, so here is a male editor that in Italian, and we're just going at it together in Italian. And so, but in a way, it's another check, which I
Mhm.
love. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this double checking all of your historical dates and accuracy and things like that, which is actually feeds into exactly the next question I was going to ask you, which is how you felt like your academic research background, how that did that play into the writing for the book, and do you think it assisted with the writing of the book?
I think it tied me down because I think I was, despite what some of the readers say, I think it made me even extra cautious
Mhm.
about the time sequence. At the same time, I had to frame it all in hopefully what is an interesting way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I uh what we don't know, there is no historical record of anyone working on malaria, despite the fact that it's an Italian word, early on.
Mhm.
So we don't know that. We do know that she was interested in science or
Right.
in alchemy because of the little room, because of the room that Francesco had made for her.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think that works in so many ways because the very idea that no one was researching malaria, we don't know that no one was researching it, but the idea that a woman might have been doing the research could be the exact reason why we don't have any record of the research being done, right? So it kind of beautifully fits into the issue of women's contributions being silenced or, not given as much attention on in historical record.
exactly. And so I yeah, I uh I'm not exactly sure how I came up with malaria. What we know is that everybody was dying of it, and we
Yeah.
know that the Medici died of it, and Francesco himself had lost his mother and two brothers to malaria,
Mhm.
and he himself had malaria, which is why scientists now removed his body and looked for evidence of malaria. He had malaria. They were in love. Really? She wouldn't be working on a cure for malaria?
It
The
fits.
term is Italian, but didn't come into being like that until the 19th century. But what it was called the third fever, the fourth fever, because what happens is there is this cycle of every 3 or 4 days. What happens is the parasite kind of manifests itself, and then it kind of dies down, and then it bumps up. And so people go through this cycle of fever and chills, and that is actually what it
Mhm.
was known as in the book. I call it the heat disease. But
Right.
what I found out, and I'm embarrassed to say this because this is actually after I had written the book, is that in 2015, a Chinese woman, Tu Yu,
Mhm.
got the Nobel Prize in the category of physiology or medicine or physiology for discovering the cure to malaria. And
Wow.
she had used 2,000 years of Chinese uh, history, of Chinese work, part of what she had done earlier before that, 50 years before that, 30 years before that, when when China had its fingers all over the place, and people were fighting, and people had malaria, she used a record of a Chinese herb, which we call artemisian. There's hundreds and hundreds of artemisians. The artemisia that's used as a prophylactic and for treatment is Artemisia annua.
Mm-hmm.
And the Artemisia looks like a long, spindly, almost weedy flower. Sweet Annie is one of the terms for
Mm-hmm.
it. We say it's a wormwood, but wormwood is an Artemisia. We get actually vermouth from that.
Okay.
Vermouth in German means wormwood, is the name for wormwood. So this lived in Chinese history, or Cathay's history, as it was called, for millennia. And so she and her team went through the record, and she was not trained as a doctor or just formally, but she did study pharmaceuticals and extractions, and she finally extracted artemisinin, which is the active ingredient,
Wow.
and is used today.
Wow.
And people also drink it as a tea, and it's maybe less effective than having the actual isolate, but we know now that you don't really boil it, you can't heat it, you barely can distill it. Bianca didn't know that,
Right. Of
but
course.
Tu Youyou did. And so Bianca comes from Venice. Venice was a major port. They had to be getting,
Of
and they
course.
did, of course, trade with China, and Artemisia had to be coming in.
Right. So it fit every little bit, even though it was something that you discovered later, it all fits together into this perfect, this perfect ball of historical fact where everything comes together correctly. And so you can just be like, yeah, I wouldn't even specify you didn't know about it ahead of time. You just let everybody think, oh, I knew all about this. I knew everything about this. I did it on purpose. But it's almost even better that you didn't know it ahead of time, because it feels like it came together, like Bianca's ghost was just
Yeah,
kind of like, hey, here's the information you need. Go and write this up so that people know about know about the history of this. And
yeah.
I think that is just so fascinating. So your scientific background really shines through in how you write Bianca, because, like I said, I have glancing interest in science. I look at it. My mother works in science, so I know things about it. But it's so clear that the author knows what they're writing, right? If I was writing a book about a scientist, it would not come through as well. I promise. So you really, are able to bring a lot to that as a result of your scientific background. So did your kind of scientific training really become part of writing this, or was it just kind of in the background?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I love chemistry. And so my biology degree at UC San Diego was really as much chemistry as biology. We never had any plant or animal biology, any organismal biology at all then.
Hmm.
It was only when I went to the University of Sussex for a year, but still, there I also studied history and philosophy of science, and for the year, and got a very big dose of the kind of political underpinnings of scientific thought and disagreement.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I do very much like chemistry, and uh, wanted to make sure that these this work that she was doing was plausible with what was available.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the amazing things about it, is because it's also that history background which allows you to look at the science that you know today and kind of translate that back to what was physically possible, what was available for her at that time, because obviously what we have now, it's not the same as what they had then. The scientific technique, the scientific technology is not the same. And so translating that is just, it was so well done. It made sense. It felt historically set correctly within the time period. That being said, Renaissance is not my specialty, and Italian Renaissance is not my specialty at all. So everybody knows I stick with my American history, a little bit of Western, a little bit of England, witch trials, that kind of stuff is my only real knowledge of European history. But
Yeah.
it felt right to me anyway.
Yeah, but mystery is. And so that is one of the things, as much as history. And just as an example, Galileo was kicking around too. And he is from Pisa. And I found out that that Ferdinando, so this is the brother who is the antagonist of this story, and later became a very big Grand Duke of Tuscany. Anyway, he employed Galileo as a tutor. And so ages were working out that one of their children, Francesco and Bianca, might be tutored by this person as well. And in fact, Bianca's son is known to have taken over the casino that we were talking about, the laboratory, and he was interested in the occult too.
That was nice.
So was Galileo.
It all fits together.
Idea, when we look at physicists, and we're even back to Newton, the whole idea of force is very esoteric. It's an occult touchstone. It's
it's something you can't see, something that you can't touch, but it's there, right? There's a lot of that in early science, definitely. Yeah, yes. I mean, we look at that, and it's like, how do you discover gravity, right? It's these things that are invisible forces acting on almost every single day. Yeah, it feels a little bit like the occult. Feels a little bit like witchcraft if you can't see it, and you just have to believe that it happens. It just works. So one of the things to kind of hone in on this for my audience specifically, how much of this book were you consciously writing about gendered authority? Like, was there an intent to kind of deal with the gender roles and the way that women were treated at that period when you went into this, or did that just kind of happen because of the story?
I knew it was going to happen because it's a story that many of us have lived. So that struggle, or that relationship, I should say, is kind of embodied in the persona of the cardinal, of Ferdinando. There aren't many characters. Sorry,
no, you're
there
fine.
aren't many characters in the book, and so. As I said, that struggle is embodied in his character, the cardinal. I mean, in a sense, men and women are playing into that. So they're playing into patriarchal structures, as are the nuns. Most of the nuns, not all, but the nuns in Venice, in Padua, and in Florence at Santa Elisabetta, where a lot of the action happens, which is on that same piazza with the open window. It had to be. And I think, so I had to think about that. Yeah. And how she was going to react and navigate that, and what battles she was going to pick, is all about that dynamic. That
sort of inherently part of the story, right? Yeah, you can't talk about her story without talking about the gender issues of the period.
Oh, absolutely. And it turns out, by many historical accounts, she was drop dead gorgeous and voluptuous. She was a blonde. So And she acknowledges that when she's 10 in a conversation, the very first chapter with her aunts. And it- it's just a data point for me,
Mhm.
how she looked. But as women scientists will attest to, if not many women, that these structures, whether you're dealing with uh, a person who identifies as a man or as a woman or both or neither, still exist.
Right. It's still impacting women in science and
And,
anyone in science to this day.
and it's a reaction to her as a young person. So she's
Mhm.
dealing with ageism also. And it's a reaction to her as a beautiful person
Mhm.
dealing with, bimbo
Yeah.
images, triggers. Yeah.
Yeah, being a woman can reduces your credibility to some degree. Being attractive, people just assume you must be dumb. It's this corollary of you didn't get where you are because you're smart or you know what you're doing. It's just because, oh, you're pretty and people like having you around. Those kind of things, and it's completely immaterial. It should be completely immaterial to assessing somebody's skills, but it's not. We're still dealing with that so much today. uh, you know, many jobs it's easier to get the job if you're attractive, but that doesn't mean you're going to get the funding or you're going to get the attention that you want because of that. It's unfortunate.
For sure. For sure. And in the book, Francesco is an interesting character. Remember, I know him pretty well because of that first 100,000 words written
Yes.
from his perspective. And, but he doesn't play too much of a role in this. I mean, he's in it. We're doing an audio tape, and I was just last night trying to find good pages for the audition tape, and there aren't
Hmm.
very many for him, actually. And so he actually saw her for who she was, even though he was a pawn in the whole thing, also in gender power. But he saw her for what and for who she was. And in fact, he wasn't a man's man either. He
Hmm.
was widely dismissed, and he was a little crazy in terms of the things he was doing as the duke, as the leader, as the ruler.
Hmm.
But he was widely dismissed for being taciturn and private and just interested, obsessed with alchemy,
Hmm.
obsessed with it, as his father had been. And so he doesn't play into that gender stereotype either.
Yeah, so he doesn't fit this traditional masculine patriarchal ideas of that time period, or even today's time period in many ways, which I'd argue that really our patriarchal idea of masculinity hasn't changed much, has it?
Yeah.
It's really pretty much the same. It's just, I think, and honestly, in my opinion, I think it's great that you're like, ah, yes, there's this important figure. He's
Mhm.
historically relevant. Let's just kind of push him to the side. He's a side character. We're not going to pay any attention to him. I'm all for that. Because I
Yeah.
mean the Medicis in general just get so much attention in pop culture history in general.
Yeah.
They get more than their fair share already, right? So it's nice to see
Yeah.
them
And
kind
in
of.
fact, yeah, in some ways I identify more with Francesco than I do Bianca.
Mhm.
I love that idea of just like right now, I mean, we're in my office. I love my office. I'm
Mhm.
sharing my office. Person came in, said hi, and I just love to be in a little space and just working, reading, writing. In fact, my son built a cabin for me in the
Oh,
woods, and that's where I wrote a
that's
lot of
amazing.
this book, and everything is repurposed, and it's all windows in the woods, gorgeous wood, rough finish, and some of it is really kind of Waldorf-esque. The children went to a Waldorf school, and Waldorf is interesting. It's one of the 12 or so initiatives of Rudolf Steiner, and I
Mhm.
actually worked at the Goetheanum in Dornach, Switzerland, which is a big center for the occult. or the esoteric, for anthroposophy, it's called. And in fact, that's where I got some of my ideas of alchemy for the book. But anyway, children were trained to make their own knitting needles from the wood. And so now I have this cabin, which is like pretty special to me.
Yeah, my sister teaches at a Waldorf school actually, so my nephews go there, so that I'm pretty familiar. I get little crocheted gifts and things like that from them all the time as a result of their school stuff, which is great. It's really an interesting approach to education, not what I grew up with at all. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But if parents really knew what Rudolf Steiner was about, they'd probably pull their children from the school.
Yeah. My sister and I have had a variety of conversations about his work in the past, some of the more odd things he had to say and do in his background. But I'll rephrase. She works at a Waldorf-inspired school. They're not officially a Waldorf school, so it's a little different. But yeah. So I just have a couple more questions for us, because we're kind of closing in on the end of this. This is already longer than I thought it would be, but I'm having such a good time talking to you that I'm just going to keep going. So what do you hope that readers will think about women and science and history at the end of this book?
Oh, that's so interesting, because I know early on you asked, if you have something else you want to say, maybe if there's something else we haven't covered, we can get into that. And I think it's just this. I mean, one answer to your question has to do with nice women, with being nice. And what I've noticed, which is awesome, because the way in which people are reacting to the book is completely their own, and so it's really fun and interesting for me to see. But I'm getting a lot of she's not a nice character. It was really hard for me to read this because she's not nice. How can you have a character like this? I really couldn't get into it. And it's really important for me to hear that, because what they're saying is women aren't like this. How can you be portraying a woman like this? And what I want to say is, oh my God, every woman I know is like this. All the women I know are just like this.
It's behind the mask. When we're not out in public, that's just who we are.
Yeah. What does nice get you? And what is nice? And nice to whom? And for whom? And what is that about? So I guess one thing is that this is nice. I guess one thing to get is that this drive that she had and her playing people, I don't think she really was that Machiavellian. Actually, I think she really truly did love Francesco, for example. But anyway, is what you have to do your work. And so and nice is subjective. So that's one thing, that that the world doesn't exist in black and white, but there is some black and white, like human trafficking, no go there, torture, no, I'm not. But so there are obviously some real bottom lines, but everything else is kind of like up for grabs. And science, one reader said, God, I can't stand how many times the word science was in there. And now I'm like rereading it because of the Italian translation. I use the word science, I don't know, like I use the word a car. I do use it a lot because everyone's science is different. And it's almost like a placeholder for purpose in life. Their purpose, their what we use to make sense of the world. And Bianca, in this one case, was using a way of looking at her treatments that required her to see on a number of different people what the reaction would be with her particular cures. So some would call that not alchemy. That would be kind of like scientific method. But other things she was doing were really not scientific methods. So we can pick and choose. Science is not a monolithic black or white thing that's
Mhm.
out there, that it really is a way of thinking, originally called natural philosophy,
Mhm.
and in fact did make great use of plants and animals in terms of coming up with ideas about how the world worked. But it's also alchemy too, and trying to search for explanations in that are not completely obvious
Yeah,
from
I think,
science.
and that is what science started out as. I mean, we're looking at the world and saying, how do we fix these things? And you just have to experiment, and there's no scientific method to that when it starts. It just, those things grow over time as we figure out what works. And so it's kind of a nice snapshot look at what the beginnings of that scientific method are, and you're not always following those rules when you're at the forefront of research, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and for example, observation is again another cornerstone or a tenet of the scientific method, but it also is in phenomenological approaches as well. And so we were talking about Waldorf and anthroposophy, which follows a Goethean science method. And
mhm,
so those phenomenological approaches also want observation
mhm.
to be a cornerstone, a foundation. It's just that it's almost all observation.
Right.
And they believe that by observing and listening and rest and staying with this, that you can perceive science.
Mhm.
And so anyway, that's where the split is. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is your first fiction, right? Your first fiction novel
Yes.
published. So do you think you're going to write any more, or do you think this is going to be your one and done? Like this was kind of a huge project that you tackled, and it took a long time, but would you want to do it again?
Maybe.
Maybe.
And
Okay.
so I leave that open in terms of what happens next. I leave that open a little bit.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a
Uh,
possibility, though.
yeah. Uh-huh. Don't know if I'm completely done with Bianca or the Medici or occult science yet.
I would love to read another one. So I'll keep my fingers crossed that you decide to write something else. We'll see what come up with that. Um, all right. So look, last little bits we want to cover here. So when is Bianca's Cure coming out? How can people get their hands on it?
Yeah, it's comes out February 10th.
Hmm.
And Simon and Schuster have a website. They're distributing the book for She Writes Press,
Hmm.
who is the publisher. And so actually, if you just Google Bianca's Cure, you'll see so many websites, but also
Okay.
indie bookstores where it's being featured. I just want to say in this regard, and as a shout out to women publishers, that I have been traditionally published.
Hmm.
And then I went with an indie publisher for my last book, Food Wise, which
Hmm.
is North Atlantic Books, and with a hybrid publisher, which She Writes Press,
Hmm.
which is women owned and operated, and I love that.
It's
And
great.
I also have a woman publicist with Get Read PR, Anne-Marie Neves, but also some marketing people, more cool women, the Book Whisperer in Florence. And
Okay.
they're the ones publishing the Italian version. So the book itself is a mix of Indian traditional and hybrid publishing, but women being in charge
Makes a difference.
is a theme, and because of that, you can find the book
No, it's
everywhere.
amazing. Yeah, and here at Bitchy History, we do love a good independent bookstore. We love them. Just use your independent bookstores. Go in, and if you can't find the book, you
Absolutely.
can ask them to order it for you at the independent bookstore usually. But we also understand books are best read, so you do what you got to do. If you gotta order it online, got to buy it from Barnes and Noble, whatever, that's fine too. We're not here to judge. Just read the books, you know. It's whatever works.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be every single book
Yeah,
from the indie bookstore, but some books would be nice to support
exactly.
them.
Absolutely. Just give them support, buy the books, leave the reviews. You know, it means a lot for everyone. Every time I get a comment on the podcast or my Substack, I'm just so happy because it's like somebody's doing the reading, and that means a lot. So you got to do that.
Right.
So how, if people want to follow you for in the future, any of your future works, are you online at all? Do you use social media?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think honestly, just Gigi Berardi and Facebook or Insta will
Mhm.
get you there. And in fact, my website, gigiberardi.com,
Mhm.
I have a blog there about science mystery. But if you don't
Ooh.
mind, announcement here, I love science history storytelling. That might be my
Mhm.
byline.
Okay, there you go.
So good. They're so good. But anyway, I'm going to start blogging. I only have about 1,000 ideas, which are spin-offs from the book.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm just a little bit hesitant in terms of timing of perhaps another book, because
You got so much more to do.
I'm diving into the writing of the book and the questions that people have, and it'll show up in Facebook, but people can also follow on the blog
Yeah.
site.
I'll put the link up to your website when I publish
Yeah.
this as well. So it'll be on the
Hey,
YouTube, it'll be on the Substack,
yeah.
and if you start a Substack or something, let me know. I'll restack some of your posts for people so they'll know where to find you.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And yeah, perfect. Yeah. I think you can download the first 2 chapters of the book if you subscribe to the
Oh,
blog. Yeah, and that's on the
awesome.
website. Yeah.
Okay, great. So everybody, Bianca's Cure is going to be out, you said February 10th. So it's going to be out. This will be out probably the week or so before. So you guys will be able to lock in and go and pre-buy the book or things like that, and check it out because it was so good. I haven't finished it yet, but I'm going to be sitting down this week to finish it. I finished all my papers for the semester, so I had a little bit of free time before my next set of courses begin. So I'm going to sit down and finish the rest. But it was a really, really great book from what I've read so far, which is about
Thank you.
2/3 of it. So thank you so much for joining me. This was really great. I love talking about it. I love talking about writing historical fiction. I'm working on one myself right now. It's a mystery novel and it's got footnotes.
Great.
So that's going to be so much fun.
Right.
So yeah, I know that writing historical fiction is hard because you get bogged down in the history part of it. I have entire like flow charts of where the red line went in Los Angeles during the 1920s so that I can be like, okay, could my character have gotten from here to here in this amount of time? Sometimes you just get bogged down in the details, but I just love how much research was put into this book. So thank you so much for joining
Thank
me.
you so much. Thank you.
History.
History. History. History.
History.
What a bitch, right?